Language revitalization, also referred to as language revival or reversing language shift, is an attempt to halt or reverse the decline of a language or to revive an extinct one. Those involved can include parties such as linguists, cultural or community groups, or governments. Often, multiple parties work together on the same project. Languages targeted for language revitalization include those in which the use and prominence is severely limited, called endangered or weakening, or those that have only a few elderly speakers and the language seems to be dying, called moribund. Sometimes various tactics of language revitalization can even be used to try and revive extinct languages. Though the goals of language revitalization vary greatly from case to case, they typically involve attempting to expand the number of speakers and use of a language, or trying to maintain the current level of use to protect the language from extinction or language death. Some argue for a distinction between language revival and language revitalization. It has been pointed out that there has only been one successful instance of a complete language revival, that of the Hebrew language, creating a new generation of native speakers without any pre-existing native speakers as a model. Language revitalization is often deemed necessary because of the sheer amount of linguistic diversity being lost. In recent times alone, it is estimated that more than 2,000 languages have already become extinct around the world. The UN estimates that more than half of the languages spoken today have fewer than 10,000 speakers, and that a quarter have fewer than 1,000 speakers, and that, unless there are some efforts to maintain them, over the next 100 years, most of these will become extinct. Besides linguistic diversity, issues of culture and identity are prominent reasons why interested parties push for language revitalization. Many people hold the view that languages are unique cultural treasures. A community's language is a unique part of their culture, often connecting them with their ancestors or with the land, making up an essential part of their history and how they see themselves. Language revitalization is also closely tied to the linguistic field of language documentation. In this field, linguists attempt to create full records of a language's grammar, vocabulary, and linguistic features. This practice can often lead to more concern for the revitalization of a specific language on study. Furthermore, the task of documentation is often taken on with the goal of revitalization in mind. Theory. One of the most important preliminary steps in language revitalization involves establishing the degree to which a particular language has been dislocated. This helps involved parties find the best way to assist or revive the language. Steps in reversing language shift. There are many different theories or models that attempt to lay out a plan for language revitalization. One of these is provided by celebrated linguist Joshua Fishman. Fishman's model for reviving threatened languages, or for making them sustainable, consists of an 8-stage process. Efforts should be concentrated on the earlier stages of restoration until they have been consolidated before proceeding to the later stages. The 8 stages are: acquisition of the language by adults, who in effect act as language apprentices. Create a socially integrated population of active speakers of the language. In localities where there are a reasonable number of people habitually using the language, encourage the informal use of the language among people of all age groups and within families, and bolster its daily use through the establishment of local neighborhood institutions in which the language is encouraged, protected and used exclusively. In areas where oral competence in the language has been achieved in all age groups, encourage literacy in the language, but in a way that does not depend upon assistance from the state education system. Where the state permits it, and where numbers warrant, encourage the use of the language in compulsory state education. Where the above stages have been achieved and consolidated, encourage the use of the language in the workplace. Where the above stages have been achieved and consolidated, encourage the use of the language in local government services and mass media. Where the above stages have been achieved and consolidated, encourage use of the language in higher education, government, etc. This model of language revival is intended to direct efforts to where they are most effective and to avoid wasting energy trying to achieve the later stages of recovery when the earlier stages have not been achieved. For instance, it is probably wasteful to campaign for the use of a language on television or in government services if hardly any families are in the habit of using the language. Additionally, Tasuku Noda describes a range of different techniques or methods that speakers can use to try to revitalize a language, including techniques to revive extinct languages and maintain weak ones. The techniques he lists are often limited to the current vitality of the language. He claims that the immersion method cannot be used to revitalize an extinct or moribund language. In contrast, the master-apprentice method of one-on-one transmission on language proficiency can be used with moribund languages. Several other methods of revitalization, including those that rely on technology such as recordings or media, can be used for languages in any state of viability. Factors that help an endangered language progress. David Crystal, in his book Language Death, proposes 6 factors that can help a language progress. He postulates that an endangered language progresses if its speakers increase the language's prestige within the dominant community, increase their wealth, increase their legitimate power in the eyes of the dominant community, have a strong presence in the education system, can write down the language, can use electronic technology. Revival linguistics. Gilad Zuckerman proposes revival linguistics as a new linguistic discipline and paradigm. Zuckerman's term, revival linguistics, is modeled upon contact linguistics. Revival linguistics inter alia explores the universal constraints and mechanisms involved in language reclamation, renewal and revitalization. It draws perspicacious comparative insights from one revival attempt to another, thus acting as an epistemological bridge between parallel discourses in various local attempts to revive sleeping tongues all over the globe. Zuckerman acknowledges the presence of local peculiarities and idiosyncrasies, but suggests that there are linguistic constraints applicable to all revival attempts. Mastering them would help revivalists and First Nations leaders to work more efficiently. For example, it is easier to resurrect basic vocabulary and verbal conjugations than sounds and word order. Revivalists should be realistic and abandon discouraging, counterproductive slogans such as, "Give us authenticity" or "Give us death." Nancy Dorian has pointed out that conservative attitudes toward loanwords and grammatical changes often hamper efforts to revitalize endangered languages, and that a division can exist between educated revitalizers, interested in historicity, and remaining speakers interested in locally authentic idiom. Structural compromise may, in fact, enhance the prospects of survival, as in the case of English in the post-Norman period. According to Zuckerman, revival linguistics combines scientific studies of native language acquisition and foreign language learning. After all, language reclamation is the most extreme case of second language learning.